They actually called the cops on me for owning a Rolls Royce, because in my neighborhood, success is apparently a crime if you're under 40 and your name isn't Chad. 1 minute, I'm standing there, soaking in the glory of my sleek ride, and the next, the HOA president is flapping her arms like she's auditioning for Real Housewives of Suburbia, shrieking that my car wrecks the visual harmony. I wish I could make this up. What started as a petty jab snowballed into public shaming, trumped-up violations, and the wildest community meltdown you'll ever witness. Buckle up, because it's about to get gloriously unhinged. Ever had a neighbor turn into a full-blown villain? Drop a comment and spill your craziest HOA tale. We might just need a support group to survive this. My name's Thompson Carter. And at 30, I'd finally hit the jackpot after a decade of hustling as a brand consultant for luxury car companies, including Rolls-Royce itself. That pristine white Phantom parked in my driveway? It was my hard-won trophy, a symbol of every late night and sacrificed weekend. When I first rolled that beauty into Willbrook Estates, I felt like I was gliding on air, the tree-lined streets, the manicured lawns, the houses radiating success. It was my dream come true. But not everyone cheered my triumph. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I met Selena Douglas. I was lovingly washing my car in the driveway when this woman stormed across the street like she was leading a one-woman army, her heels clicking with purpose. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel, across the street like she was inspecting crime scene evidence. Her glare zeroed in on my Rolls Royce like it had insulted her ancestors. Excuse me, she sniffed, arms crossed. With HOA arrogance, are you the new resident Thompson Carter? I said, just moved in last week. Her gaze didn't lift from the car. It was as if my existence was secondary to what she considered a vehicular crime. You need to register that vehicle with the HOA immediately, she announced, crossing her arms like she was some kind of automotive authority. I blinked, thinking, I'd misheard register my car with the HOA, she nodded gravely. All luxury vehicles must be approved for color coordination and aesthetic compliance. Your car disrupts the neighborhood's carefully maintained visual harmony. I actually laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face remained stone cold. Serious lady, this is my driveway, my house and my car. I don't need anyone's permission to park it here. That's when her mask slipped, and I saw the real Selena for the first time. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer to my car. The fee for non-compliance is $500, and that's just for the first offense. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my voice steady. Let me guess, you're the HOA president? She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. Selena Douglas. And yes, I am. I've been maintaining the standards of this community for 8 years. Then she did something that still makes my blood boil. She looked me up and down like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe and said, tell me, how exactly does someone your age afford a car like this? Most people your age are still figuring out how to make rent. The implication was clear. She was suggesting I'd gotten the car through questionable means. Through hard work and smart business decisions, I replied coldly, something you might want to try sometime. That's when she lost it completely. Her face turned red, and she actually raised her fist and brought it down hard on my hood, leaving a small but visible dent in the pristine metal. You arrogant little brat, do you have any idea who I am, who my husband is? I stared at the dent, my hands automatically clenching into fists. 10 years of work and this psycho had just damaged my dream car. Because she didn't like my attitude, get off my property, I said quietly, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Now she stepped back, but the damage was done literally and figuratively. This isn't over, she hissed. I know exactly what kind of the person you are, and I'm going to make sure everyone else does too. As she stomped back across the street, I pulled out my phone and called my friend Audrey Parker, a data analyst who has this amazing talent for finding dirt on people who deserve it. Audrey, I need you to look into someone named Selena Douglas, I said, still staring at the dent. Lives in Willowbrook Estates, HOA president, married to someone she thinks is important. When Audrey called back 20 minutes later, her tone was excited. Thompson, your new neighbor is a piece of work. Selena Douglas, former bank manager, fired 18 months ago after an internal investigation for customer harassment and discrimination. There was a whole lawsuit that got settled quietly. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. Her husband, Spencer, is an investment fund manager who's been trying to buy a Rolls-Royce for 3 years, but keeps getting rejected for financing because of credit issues tied to that lawsuit settlement. Suddenly, Selena's reaction made perfect sense. It wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics, it was pure, petty jealousy. Here I was, a 30-year-old who'd earned his dream car, fair and square, while her husband couldn't even get approved for financing. That evening, I found an email from Selena demanding I attend an emergency HOA meeting to address violations of community standards. I deleted it, then immediately made a copy for my records. If Selena Douglas wanted to play games, I was about to show her what happens when you mess with someone who makes a living managing crisis. She thought she could humiliate me in public. I'd just found something that was going to make her regret ever setting foot on my property. The HOA meeting was held in a dull, beige room with about 20 neighbors in stiff folding chairs. I came dressed like I was walking into a legal deposition, not a neighborhood gathering. Selena stood front and center, holding up a poster board plastered with doctored photos of my house. One showed my Rolls, parked sideways across 4 spots. Another had it blocking a fire hydrant that doesn't even exist. This man, she said with the tone of someone reading out a criminal charge, has flagrantly violated HOA aesthetics and endangered emergency access. This individual, she pointed at me like I was a criminal defendant, has flagrantly violated multiple HOA regulations with his ostentatious display of wealth. Not only is this vehicle parked in violation of our aesthetic guidelines, but as you can see from these photographs, it's blocking access for emergency vehicles. The photos were obvious fakes to anyone with half a brain, but I could see some neighbors nodding along, probably too intimidated by Selena's aggressive presentation to question what they were seeing. Then she dropped the real bombshell. Furthermore, I question how someone his age can afford a car worth over $400. Zero. That kind of spending suggests activities that deserve serious scrutiny. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implication hit home. She was essentially accusing me of criminal activity in front of my new neighbors, suggesting that my legitimate business success was somehow dirty money. The whispers started immediately, neighbors leaning toward each other with concerned expressions, shooting glances in my direction. I was about to respond when a voice interrupted. "Excuse me," said a young woman from the back. "I'm Maria Santos. I rent above the Hendersons while finishing nursing school, and I need to speak." Selena's expression immediately soured. "This meeting is for homeowners only." Selena snapped, "Renters don't have voting rights." But Maria didn't back down. "Last month, Mrs. Douglas threatened to have me evicted because she didn't approve of my car being parked in my own assigned space. She said my Honda Civic was bringing down property values and that young people like me were ruining the character of the neighborhood." The room went dead silent, and I could see Selena's carefully constructed narrative starting to crumble. "That's completely irrelevant," Selena said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "We're here to discuss this man's violations, not to relitigate unrelated tenant disputes." Maria stood up, her cheeks flushed with anger. "It's not unrelated. You're doing the exact same thing to him that you did to me, attacking someone for having something nice, and making up rules to justify your behavior." That's when Selina really showed her true colors. She turned on Maria with vicious intensity and said, "Sit down and shut up, you little piece of trash. Nobody asked for your opinion, and nobody cares about your sober story." The gasps from the other neighbors were audible, and I saw several people exchange shocked looks, even in a room full of people who'd been nodding along moments earlier. Calling a nursing student trash was a bridge too far defining. For Mr. Carter's violations is $1,500 due immediately, Selina announced, and if he refuses to pay, I'll be contacting the appropriate authorities to investigate the source of his income. She sat down with a satisfied smirk, clearly thinking she delivered a knockout punch. I stood up, slowly, my portfolio in hand, and looked around the room. "Mrs. Douglas, you've made some very serious accusations tonight, and I think it's only fair that I have a chance to respond." She waved her hand dismissively. "The evidence speaks for itself. Pay the fine or face the consequences." I opened my portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Actually, the evidence does speak for itself. This is a letter from my employer, Pinnacle Brand Consulting, confirming that I've been working as their lead automotive specialist for 7 years with an annual income that more than justifies my recent purchase. I can also provide tax returns, bank statements, and a purchase receipt showing that every penny came from legitimate business earnings." Doubt crept into the neighbors' expressions as they processed this information. "Mrs. Douglas, you've accused me of criminal activity with no evidence. You've doctored photographs to make it look like my legally parked car is violating regulations that don't actually exist, and you've just verbally assaulted a hard-working student for having the courage to speak up. The question isn't whether I belong in this community. The question is whether you do." Shalina's face had gone from red to pale. "This meeting is over," she announced. Abruptly, all in favor of the fine, only 3 hands went up out of 20 people, and even those looked hesitant as people started filing out. George Reynolds, an older gentleman who'd been sitting quietly, approached me. "Son, I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and I've watched that woman terrorize half the people here. What you did tonight took guts. If you need someone to back you up, you've got my support." As I walked to my car, I could see Selena and her husband Spencer having an animated conversation by their Mercedes that evening. I found another email waiting for me, threatening legal action if I didn't seize my harassment and defamation of Selena. The woman had no sense of irony whatsoever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Selena had been 3 days after the HOA meeting. I was taking a client call when I heard multiple vehicles pulling into my driveway. I looked out my window and felt my stomach drop. 2 police cruisers were parked behind my Rolls Royce, and standing between them was Selina Douglas, gesturing dramatically while talking to 3 officers. He wore sunglasses under grey skies, radiating fake outrage. I quickly ended my call, grabbed my phone to start recording, and headed outside to see what fresh hell awaited me. "Officers, that's him," Selina announced as I stepped onto my porch, pointing at me like I was a fugitive. "That's the man who threatened me." The lead officer, a middle-aged guy with graying temples who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, approached me with his hand resting casually on his belt. "Sir, we've received a complaint about a verbal altercation. Can you tell us your side of what happened?" I kept my voice calm and respectful, officer. I have no idea what Mrs. Douglas is talking about. The only interaction we've had was at an HOA meeting 3 days ago where she made some accusations that I responded to politely and professionally. Selina exploded polite. You publicly humiliated me, called me a liar and said I didn't belong here. The lead officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, arguments at HOA meetings aren't usually police matters. Did he threaten you specifically? That's when Selina turned into full daytime soap villain. He said I don't belong. And yesterday he drove past my house multiple times. He's clearly trying to intimidate me. I'm honestly terrified for my safety. I stared at her in disbelief. Officer, I live 4 houses down from her. If I drive past her house, it's because I'm going to or from my own home. And as for the meeting, I never threatened anyone. I simply defended myself against false accusations. But Selina wasn't finished with her Academy Award performance. Look at that car, she said, gesturing toward my Rolls Royce like it was evidence of criminal activity. A 30-year-old with a vehicle worth more than most people's houses. There's something very suspicious about his entire situation. And when I tried to address it through proper HOA channels, he became verbally aggressive and threatening. I could see the officers exchanging glances, and suddenly I realized how this must look. A young guy with an expensive car being accused by an older, well-dressed woman who seemed genuinely distressed. The second officer, younger and clearly eager to make something happen, stepped forward. So we're going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back while we sort this out. Are you arresting me for what we're not arresting you? The lead officer clarified. But we need to detain you temporarily while we investigate the complaint. I couldn't believe it. In broad daylight on my own lawn, I was being cuffed because Selina couldn't handle someone else's success. This is insane, I muttered, turning around calmly to avoid making things worse. The cuffs clicked shut, firm, humiliating. Selina beamed like she'd won a game show. Your fancy car can't help you now. She smirked already, filming for her fan club maybe next time. You'll think twice before trying to intimidate a respected member of this community. Neighbors emerged, some worried, some entertained, as if Netflix had dropped a new episode on my front lawn. Maria appeared furious, her arms crossed. This is ridiculous. Maria called out, he never did anything wrong. She's the one who's been terrorizing everyone. But one of the officers immediately turned toward her. Ma'am, please step back and let us handle this situation. George Reynolds had also emerged from his house and was walking slowly in our direction, his expression grim. I could see him taking in the scene, me in handcuffs on my own lawn, while Selina recorded it like it was her personal victory celebration. The whole thing felt surreal. The lead officer was questioning Selina about specific details when George approached. Excuse me, officers, he said, politely, but I witnessed the interaction these folks are discussing, and I think there might be some confusion about what actually happened. Selina immediately whirled around George. This doesn't concern you. Please go back to your house. But George wasn't intimidated, actually. Selina, it does concern me. I was at that meeting and I heard every word that was said. This young man never threatened you or anyone else. In fact, you were the one making accusations and calling people names. He looked directly at the officers. If anyone was being threatening or aggressive, it was Mrs. Douglas. I could see the officers starting to realize they might have stepped into a neighborhood dispute that was more complicated than Selina had made it seem. So did you hear Mr. Carter make any specific threats against Mrs. Douglas? George shook his head firmly. Not a single one he defended himself against. Some pretty serious accusations, but he was completely professional about it. Selina's face was getting redder by the minute. He's lying. They're all in on it together. These people have been conspiring against me since the day he moved in the lead. Officer looked at me, then at Selena, then at the growing crowd of neighbors, ma'am. Based on the witness statements we're hearing, it doesn't sound like any actual threats were made. Disagreeing with someone at a community meeting isn't grounds for filing a complaint. He nodded to his partner, who stepped forward and unlocked my handcuffs. The relief was immediate, but the humiliation was going to stick with me for a long time as the officers were packing up to leave. Selena made one last desperate attempt to salvage her narrative. This isn't over. She announced loudly enough for all the neighbors to hear, "I know exactly what kind of person he is, and I'm going to make sure when everyone else knows too. There are legal remedies for harassment and intimidation, and I intend to pursue them." She stormed back toward her house, shooting one final venomous look in my direction. George approached me with genuine concern in his eyes. "Son, that woman is dangerous. She's not going to let this go, and she's got resources to make your life miserable." If you're not careful, that evening I called Audrey to fill her in on the day's events. She actually got you handcuffed. Audrey's voice was incredulous. "Thompson, this woman is completely unhinged. We need to dig deeper into her background because normal people don't escalate neighborly disputes to false police reports." The next evening, I was grilling dinner on my back patio when George Reynolds appeared at my fence gate, looking around nervously like he was about to share state secrets. "Thompson, we need to talk," he said quietly. "But not out here where the Douglases can see us." I invited him inside and over coffee in my kitchen. George told me something that changed everything. That woman has been systematically targeting people in this neighborhood for years. He began pulling out a manila folder from under his jacket. After what happened yesterday with the police, I decided it was time someone did something about it. George opened the folder and spread out incriminating evidence, years of documentation, proving Selena's pattern of abuse. "Here's what happened to Maria Santos," he said. Pointing to a series of emails, Selena didn't just threaten her about parking. She actually contacted her landlord and tried to get her evicted by claiming she was running some kind of illegal business out of the apartment. The only business was Maria tutoring high school kids to help pay for nursing school. He flipped to another section. "Here's the Rodriguez family. From 2 years ago, Selena forced them to repaint their entire house because she claimed the original color was inconsistent with community standards, even though it was the exact same shade as 5 other houses on the same street, cost them $8. They couldn't afford." I stared at the documentation, feeling anger and vindication. This wasn't just about my Rolls Royce. Selena had been terrorizing people for years. "George, this is incredible, but why are you showing me this?" Now, he leaned back inside because you're the first person who stood up to her publicly and lived to tell about it. Most folks just pay her fake fines and keep their heads down because they're afraid of making it worse. That's when George dropped the real bombshell about HOA finances. Selena has been skimming money for years, but she's been smart about it, never taking enough at once to trigger an audit, always having plausible explanations for expenses that somehow never improve anything. He pulled out financial records showing the scope of her theft. Last year alone, she authorized 50 0 in fake consultations that all went to companies owned by her friends and family. The money goes out, services are never actually provided, and it gets kicked back to her under the table. I was about to respond when my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Spencer Douglas standing on my porch, looking significantly less confident than his wife usually did. George immediately started gathering up his papers. "I should go," he whispered. "If Spencer sees me here with all this, it could get ugly." Spencer, in a pricey suit, looked unusually desperate. "Thompson, we need to talk," he said, without any preamble. "May I come in?" I led him to my living room, curious about. What could possibly have brought Spencer Douglas to my door? He sat down heavily, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. Let me be blunt. Spencer began shifting uncomfortably. The car of yours, it set something off in Selena. We've tried getting one for years, but after her bank scandal, our credit's toast lenders won't touch us. When she saw yours parked outside, it wasn't just jealousy. It was resentment, and yeah, she took it out on you. He paused, clearly hating having to admit this. When Selena saw your Rolls Royce in the driveway, it brought up a lot of frustration about our own situation. She took it out on you, which was wrong. But I think I understand her perspective. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Spencer, are you seriously telling me that your wife has been terrorizing me because you can't get approved for a car loan? His face flushed red. It's not that simple. The legal issues stemming from Selena's departure from the bank created some credit complications that affected our entire financial portfolio. We can afford the car, but lenders won't touch us since Selena's lawsuit wrecked our credit profile. Spencer leaned in. Selena will back off if you hide your car, park it inside. And this all disappears. It's a simple compromise that lets everyone maintain their dignity. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to hide my car because it makes your wife jealous? I want to resolve this situation before it gets any more out of hand. Spencer replied, Selena has connections in this community that go beyond the HOA, her former colleagues. In banking, my clients in the investment sector. If this escalates, it could affect your business relationships in ways you might not anticipate. That was a mistake. The moment Spencer made it clear this was a threat disguised as a negotiation, I knew exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. Spencer, let me make something very clear, I said, standing up to signal that our conversation was over. I earned my car through legitimate hard work. I park it legally on my own property, and I'm not going to hide my success because your wife can't handle seeing what she can't have. If you want to threaten my business relationships, go ahead, but to be prepared for the consequences. Spencer's mask of reasonableness finally slipped. You have no idea who you're messing with. Kid, this neighborhood, this community, the people who matter here, they've been my clients and colleagues for years. You're nobody. I walked to my front door and opened it. Thanks for stopping by. Spencer, please tell your wife that if she has any more complaints about my car, she can file them. Through the proper legal channels after he left, I immediately called Audrey to fill her in on both George's revelations and Spencer's visit. Thompson, this is bigger than we thought, she said. If they're threatening your business relationships, it means they're genuinely scared. People only make those kinds of threats when they're desperate. That night, I found a formal HOA notice in my mailbox informing me of an emergency assessment of $1,500 for community disruption. The notice included revised HOA regulations that had apparently been approved in an emergency session. The previous evening, the new rules specifically prohibited ostentatious displays of wealth and had been backdated. To make it look like they'd been in effect when I moved in, Spencer and Selena had declared war, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left a paper trail that would be very difficult to explain. 2 weeks after Spencer's visit, I decided it was time to stop playing defense and start taking the fight directly to Selena and her corrupt little kingdom. Audrey had been working her magic with the HOA's digital records, and what she'd found was going to blow this whole thing wide open. But I knew that simply presenting evidence at another boring meeting wouldn't be enough. I needed to make sure the entire community saw exactly what kind of people they'd been letting run their neighborhood. That's why I decided to live stream the next HOA meeting, though I kept that detail to myself until the perfect moment. The meeting was held in the same beige community center, but this time I came prepared. I brought a portable projector and had scoped out the room. Beforehand, Audrey was there too, sitting in the back with her own laptop, ready to provide technical support. If needed, Maria Santos had also come, despite Selina's previous attempts to silence her, and George Reynolds was in his usual spot, looking like a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. The room was more crowded than usual. Word had gotten around that something big was going to happen. Selina opened the meeting with her usual theatrical authority, but neighbors had started questioning her recent decisions and fake regulations before we addressed the outstanding compliance issues, she announced, shooting a meaningful glare in my direction. I want to remind everyone that this community's standards exist for a reason. When people refuse to follow established guidelines, it creates chaos that affects everyone's property values and quality of life. She clicked to her first slide, another doctored photo of my Rolls-Royce, this one supposedly showing it blocking a fire hydrant that was actually 3 houses away from where I park. Mr. Carter continues to flaunt community regulations despite multiple warnings and opportunities to comply. The murmurs around the room were different this time, less supportive of Selina, more skeptical of her claims, but she pressed on, apparently oblivious to the shifting mood. That's when I stood up, laptop in hand, and calmly walked to the front of the room. Mrs. Douglas, since you've made some very serious accusations, I think it's only fair that we examine all the evidence available. I connected my laptop to the projector I'd set up while she was talking, and suddenly the wall behind her was filled with a bright display. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to show you some very interesting conversations that have been taking place in your HOA's private messaging systems. The first thing I projected was a screenshot of Selina's group chat with 3 other board members discussing ways to get rid of the problem residents in the neighborhood. The messages included her calling various community members low-class garbage welfare queens and the kind of riff-raff that ruins property values. The room went dead silent as people read Selina's real opinions about her own neighbors. These messages were sent over the past 6 months, and they include discussions of how to manufacture violations against residents that Mrs. Douglas personally dislikes. Selina turned ghost white, scrambling to understand how I'd breached her sacred little kingdom. Those messages are taken out of context, she protested. They're private conversations that have nothing to do with official HOA business. But I was just getting started. The next slide showed a detailed financial analysis that Audrey had prepared, tracking HOA funds that had been diverted to fake consulting companies. This analysis shows over $50,000 in community funds that have been paid to companies that don't actually exist for services that were never provided. The room exploded. Neighbors furious over fake improvements, while real problems were ignored. But the real showstopper was what came next. I played an audio recording from the previous week's emergency board meeting where the fake regulations had been created. In the recording, you could clearly hear Selina and Spencer discussing how to create legal justification for forcing that arrogant kid to get rid of his car, and how to make sure everyone knows that showing off wealth isn't acceptable in this community, that recording is illegal. Spencer shouted from the back of the room. You can't use secretly recorded conversations as evidence in a community meeting. But George Reynolds stood up with a satisfied smile. Actually, Spencer, you're wrong about that. Under state law, recordings of meetings that affect community governance are perfectly legal as long as one party consents to the recording. And since I was present at that meeting as a community member, my consent makes the recording admissible. The look of horror on Spencer's face was priceless. The final piece of evidence was something even I hadn't expected to be. So damning, Audrey had found a series of text messages between Selina and the fake consulting companies discussing how to inflate invoices and hide the paper trail. But buried in those messages was something even more revealing. Selina admitting that she'd targeted Maria Santos specifically because Maria had posted a photo on social media praising my Rolls Royce and saying it was inspiring to see young people achieving their dreams. Selena's jealousy wasn't just about the car, it was about anyone who represented the kind of success she desperately wanted but couldn't achieve. The room was in complete chaos now, with neighbors shouting questions and demanding answers. Selena was frantically trying to regain control, screaming that everything was fabricated evidence and that I was part of some conspiracy to destroy the community, but her credibility was gone, and everyone could see it. Maria Santos stood up and took the microphone I offered her. "Mrs. Douglas called me trash for defending the truth," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But the real trash is someone who steals from her own neighbors and then calls them garbage for having less money than she does." The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to remove Selena from her position as HOA president and to demand a full financial audit of all community funds. Spencer tried to argue that the vote was illegitimate, but he was shouted down by neighbors who were done with his family's manipulation as people were filing out, discussing what they just witnessed and making plans for community action. Selena made one last desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. She grabbed the microphone and screamed, "This isn't over, I'll sue every single one of you for defamation and conspiracy. You have no idea what kind of resources I have access to." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The community had seen who she really was, and there was no going back. The morning after the live stream meeting, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The HOA meeting had been shared across multiple neighborhood social media groups, and the video was spreading faster than I'd ever imagined. But the real surprise came when Audrey called me at 7 in the morning, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Thompson, you need to check your email right now. We just got something that's going to end this permanently." I stumbled to my laptop and opened the message she'd forwarded. It was from a private investigator I'd hired during the second week of this ordeal, a decision I'd kept to myself because I wasn't sure it would pan out. The 47-page report came with a damning summary. "Mr. Carter, attached, you will find comprehensive documentation of financial fraud, bribery, and corruption involving Mrs. 2, Selena Douglas, and several local contractors. The evidence includes video surveillance, bank records, and recorded conversations that clearly demonstrate a pattern of illegal activity spanning approximately 3 years. This material is sufficient to support criminal charges." I stared at the screen, hardly believing what I was reading. What had started as a neighborly dispute over my car had uncovered a legitimate criminal enterprise. The centerpiece of the investigator's report was a video that I knew would change everything. It showed Selena meeting with a construction contractor behind a local restaurant, accepting an envelope of cash in exchange for approving a project that violated multiple building codes. The audio quality was crystal clear, and you could hear her explicitly discussing how to hide the money trail and create fake documentation. "This payment ensures that your project gets approved without any of the usual environmental assessments," Saloon's voice said on the recording. "My husband handles the financial documentation, so there won't be any questions from the city planning office." I immediately called an emergency HOA meeting for that evening, but this time I made sure to invite local media and city officials. If I was going to expose Selena's criminal activity, I wanted to make sure it was done properly and legally. By 6 keys, the community center was packed, not just with residents, but with reporters from 2 local news stations and an investigator from the city's fraud division. Selena arrived looking haggarded and desperate, clearly knowing that something big was about to happen. Spencer was conspicuously absent. According to George, he'd been seen loading suitcases into his car earlier that afternoon. I started the presentation with a simple statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, what began as a dispute over community standards has revealed something much more serious tonight. We're going to see evidence of criminal activity that has been stealing from this community for years. I played the bribery video first, and the reaction was immediate and intense. Gasps, angry shouts, and expressions of complete shock filled the room as neighbors watched their former HOA president taking cash payments. For illegal activities, Selena tried to interrupt, claiming the video was manipulated and taken out of context, but the evidence was too clear for anyone to doubt its authenticity. The financial evidence was equally devastating. The investigator had traced over 120,000 in fraudulent transactions connected to projects that violated building regulations, putting residents at risk, while Selena profited from kickbacks. This means that several buildings in our community may not meet code requirements, I explained. To the horrified crowd, residents have been unknowingly living in potentially unsafe conditions, while Mrs. Douglas profited from looking the other way. But the most devastating piece of evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Selena and Spencer. From just 2 days earlier in the recording, they discussed destroying evidence and transferring assets. Before the kids' investigation gets too far, Spencer could be heard saying, "If this comes out, we're looking at serious jail time. We need to move the money offshore and blame everything on accounting errors." Selena's response was equally incriminating. "I can handle Thompson Carter. I've been manipulating people like him my entire career. The real problem is, if the city gets involved." The room was in stunned silence as the full scope of their criminal enterprise became clear. This wasn't just about HOA corruption, it was about systematic fraud that had endangered the entire community while enriching two people who had been trusted. With protecting everyone's interests, the city fraud investigator stood up and addressed the room. "Directly based on what we've seen tonight, we'll be opening a formal criminal investigation immediately. Mrs. Douglas, you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly recommend that you contact an attorney." Before making any further statements, Selena's reaction was something I'll never forget. Instead of showing remorse or trying to maintain her innocence, she turned on the community with pure venom. "You ungrateful idiots!" she screamed, her carefully maintained facade completely crumbling. "I've been protecting your property values for years. Do you think this neighborhood would be worth anything without my standards and oversight?" It was a remarkable display of narcissism. Even when caught red-handed committing crimes, she genuinely believed she was the victim. The media coverage was swift and thorough. By the next morning, the story was on every local news channel with headlines like "HOA President Caught Taking Bribes and Neighborhood Corruption Exposed by Rolls-Royce Dispute." My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but I kept my statement simple and focused on the community impact rather than personal vindication. "This was never about me or my car," I told reporters. "This was about ensuring that people in positions of trust actually served the community instead of exploiting it." Spencer's disappearance made headlines too. Within 48 hours of the evidence being presented, he'd emptied several bank accounts and apparently fled the state. Selena was arrested at her home while trying to delete files from her computer. The image of her being led away in handcuffs was featured on the front page of the locally newspaper, along with a photo of my Rolls-Royce and the headline, "The car that brought down a criminal." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Selena was charged with fraud, bribery, and conspiracy, while Spencer was wanted on additional charges related to money laundering and evidence tampering. 6 months later, I was washing my Rolls-Royce in the driveway on a perfect Saturday morning when I noticed something that would have been unthinkable during the Selena era: neighbors actually stopping to admire the car and chat. Mrs. Peterson from across the street brought me a cup of coffee and told me how much she enjoyed seeing something beautiful in the neighborhood. Every day, the young couple who'd moved into the Douglas house after it went into foreclosure asked if they could take a photo with the car for their anniversary because they said it represented living your dreams instead of tearing down other people's. The transformation in community spirit was remarkable, and I realized that my car had become something entirely different from what Selena had tried to make it. Instead of a symbol of division, it had become a symbol of possibility. The legal aftermath had been swift and decisive. Selena was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy, while Spencer received 6 years for money laundering and evidence tampering. The restitution payments were still ongoing, but the community had recovered most of the stolen funds, which were being used for actual improvements like new playground equipment and updated security systems. More importantly, the building code violations had all been addressed, ensuring that everyone's homes met proper safety standards. George Reynolds had proven to be an excellent HOA president, implementing policies that emphasized transparency, community building, and actual problem solving rather than petty rule enforcement. What surprised me most was how the story had resonated beyond our little neighborhood. The video of Selena's takedown had been shared millions of times, turning our HOA meeting into a viral sensation about standing up to corruption and bullying. I'd received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories about HOA tyranny and community corruption. Many said that watching Selena get exposed had inspired them to document and report problems in their own situations. The media attention had also been surprisingly positive for my business. Instead of the professional damage that Spencer had threatened my reputation as someone who stood up for principle, had actually attracted new clients. The best part, watching Spencer's entire life unravel, the investigation had revealed that his investment fund had been built on the same kind of fraudulent practices he had used in the HOA, and several of his wealthy clients had lost significant money due to his schemes. His professional licenses had been revoked, his assets seized for restitution, and his reputation in the financial sector completely destroyed. The man who threatened my business relationships had found his own career permanently ruined by his criminal behavior. It was a perfect example of karma in action. I got a call from Rolls-Royce marketing that provided the perfect opportunity to mark the anniversary. The marketing team had heard about my story and wanted to feature it in a campaign about living without limits. They proposed creating a short commercial that told the story of how my car had exposed corruption and brought a community together. We want to show that owning a Rolls-Royce isn't just about luxury, the marketing director explained. It's about having the confidence to be yourself and stand up for what's right, regardless of what other people think. The commercial shoot was surreal, but incredibly fun. They filmed scenes of me driving through the neighborhood, washing the car in my driveway, and even recreated parts of the HOA meeting with actors playing Selena and Spencer. The tagline was, "Some people see a car, others see a statement. At Rolls-Royce, we see the courage to be extraordinary." When the commercial aired during prime time, my phone exploded with calls and messages from friends, family, and complete strangers who'd seen the ad. The funniest responses came from people who knew Selena personally. Apparently, she'd seen the commercial from prison and had been furious that her downfall was being used to sell luxury cars on the actual anniversary. The neighborhood threw a block party that they called Rolls-Royce Appreciation Day. George had organized games for the kids, a barbecue for the adults, and even hired a local band to play in the community center parking lot. The highlight was when they presented me with a custom street sign that read, "Thompson Carter Way," as a joke gift. "You saved this community," George said during his speech, "not with money or connections or political influence, but with courage and integrity. That's the kind of neighbor we all want to be." As the party was winding down, I took a moment to walk around my Rolls-Royce and think about everything that had happened a year ago. This car had been nothing more than a symbol of personal achievement, the reward for a decade of hard work and smart decisions. But Selini's jealousy and corruption had transformed it into something much more significant. It had become a catalyst for justice, a tool for exposing crime, and ultimately a symbol of the right to succeed without being torn down by people who couldn't handle your success. The best part was knowing that Selina's worst nightmare had come true. She tried to humiliate me for having something she couldn't afford, but instead she'd created a situation where my success became even more visible, and celebrated the commercial had made my story nationally known. The media coverage had boosted my business, and the community respect had given me friendships that would last a lifetime. Meanwhile, she was sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything she tried so hard to protect: her reputation, her wealth, her freedom, and her husband. Driving home that night, I realized success isn't just about earning it, it's about defending it when envy comes knocking. Selina had targeted me because she thought I was just a young guy with a nice car who wouldn't fight back. She couldn't have been more wrong. My car had been the beginning of her downfall, but my willingness to stand up for myself and others had been what finished the job. If you're out there dealing with your own Selina, someone who tries to tear you down because they can't handle your success, remember this story. Document everything, stand your ground, and never let bullies convince you that you don't deserve what you've earned. The powerful often crumble fastest, especially when their power is built on lies that can't survive daylight. My Rolls-Royce started this fight, but courage and community finished it, and today that beautiful white Phantom sits proudly in my driveway, exactly where it belongs, a reminder